All right, so now that we know how to find a greatest common factor, we're going to learn how to factor using a GCF. Okay, so that's our learning target. So how can I use a greatest common factor to factor a polynomial? So first of all, distributive property. What is it? That will help us a little bit with talking about factoring. So remember, distributive property says I can take this 2x and distribute it to both of these terms. I would get 12x squared plus 14x. Okay, so that's distributive property. By the same token, over on this one, again, I would distribute. I have another term here, but I would distribute the 8x to the third to all three of those terms, and I would get 40x to the fifth plus 24x to the fourth minus 32x to the third. Okay, so that's distributive property, generally speaking. Today, what we're going to learn is something called factoring, and actually what we're going to do is factoring is really just the distributive property backwards. So what we're going to do is start with this. You'll be given something like this, and you're going to go backwards and factor it so that your answer actually is this. This is called the factored form. So how do I take a polynomial and write it in factored form so that it looks like this? And there are advantages to doing this. So really this is just working the distributive property the other way. That's called factoring. Okay, so again, as you can see at the top, I wrote here, factoring is the distributive property backwards. So when somebody says we're factoring, we're just going the other way. It's still the distributive property, actually, it's just the other way. So how does this work? Well, to factor with a GCF, the first thing you need to do is find the GCF of all the terms. And that's a key thing, is make sure it's of all the terms. Once you have factored that or figured out the GCF, then you're going to write it in front of some parentheses, just like we did. Like you'll notice right here, this thing would be out in front. That would be your GCF. And then you're going to figure out what goes inside those parentheses. Okay? So then you'll put some parentheses. And then what you'll need to do to figure out what goes in this space here is you will need to divide each of the terms by the greatest common factor and then write them in the parentheses. And you'll see what that means, but those are the steps, really, okay? So here we go. Let's try this out. Okay, so I'm going to factor each polynomial, and the first thing I need to do is find my GCF. So I need to find the GCF of all of my terms. That would be this term and this term. So I'm going to start with doing the same thing I did before. 8, break that apart. 2 and 4, 2 and 2. Okay, and then I'm going to do 20. I'm going to say 4 and 5. 5's prime. Okay, now to find my GCF, I'm going to write them over each other. So I'm going to write 8x squared is the same as 2 times 2 times 2 times x. Okay? 20x would be, let's see, 2 times 2 times 5 times x. Okay? And then I'm going to circle anything that they have in common. So let's see. Again, they don't have to line up. These just happen to line up here, but they don't have to. So I'm going to bring those down to a 2 and an x. So what is my GCF? So this means my GCF of those terms would be 4x. Okay. Now, so step 1, done. Now I'm going to write this with the GCF in front of some parentheses. So I'm just going to put one parenthesis, and then I'll put the other one in here when I get all my terms. Okay, so now remember, I'm really kind of thinking what times this would give me my first term. In this case, that would be 8x squared. So I'm going to work backwards. If I have multiplication, I'm going to go backwards. Opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to start by seeing if I can, actually I might move this here a little bit. Okay, so this will be my final answer. So up top here I have 8x squared. So I'm going to write 8x squared, and I'm going to divide that by my GCF. So it says divide each term by the GCF. So in this case, my GCF was 4x. The next term that I have was 20x. It's positive, right? Positive 20x. I'm going to divide that by 4x as well. Okay, so let's go through. What is 8x squared divided by 4x? Well, this would be 2, and then I'm going to subtract my exponent. So this is really a 1. So it'd be 2x to the first power, or 2x. Okay, this one here would be 5, and then x divided by x, those would cancel, so that'd be just 5. Now I'm going to put these two terms inside the parentheses, so I'm going to write 2x, and then they're going to each be separated by a plus or minus sign. Well, this is positive 5, so we're going to put plus 5. And then I'm going to close the parenthesis. This is the factored form of this right here, 8x squared plus 20x. So one way you could check is you could distribute this to see if it works. You don't have to do that, so I won't do that here, but that's one way you could check to make sure your answer is right. And if you get 8x squared plus 20x, you know you did it right. But this is ultimately factoring using a GCF. This is what I'd want to see. Okay? All right, I hope that kind of makes sense. We're going to do two more. And here, this one, you'll notice I got 3 terms. Okay, so how does this work? Well, really not much different. So let's start. We'll do 18. I got 2 and 9, 3 and 3. Okay, now I'm going to do, how about 12? I got, let's see, 3 and 4 maybe? 2 and 2? Again, it doesn't matter how you do those. Now you'll notice this is negative 24. For our purposes right now, we'll worry about the negative later. Just worry about the 24. Okay, so let me see. I'm going to do 3 and 8. Do whatever pair you want. 2 and 4. And then 2 and 2. Okay, so now I need to write all my numbers here. Let's start with 18x to the 4th. Okay, I got 2 times 3 times 3 times x times x times x times x. Okay, now let's do 12. X to the 3rd, 12x to the 3rd is again in order here, 2 times 2 times 3 times, I've got 3 x's. Okay, now let's do 24 x squared. Again, that's negative, but we'll worry about the negative later. This is 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 times x times x. Okay, so now that you've got that, you want to circle anything that, now this is the thing, they all 3 have to have them in common now. So that's kind of weird, all 3 in common. So let's see, I see 1, 2. I see, it looks like 1, 3. They have to have them all in common. You could do it this way, or you can, as long as you're grabbing a 3, so they have that in common. What else do they have in common? they've got an x. All three of them. Again, it doesn't really matter which ones you circle as long as all three of them have that. So it looks like those are the groups that I have. So I have what, a 2, a 3, an x, and an x. And I'm just going to multiply those together to get my GCF. So what is my GCF? It would be 6x squared. All right. So now we're going to do this one here, right? Write the GCF in front. So I'm going to actually just write it right here. 6x squared. Okay. And then I'll put the other parenthesis when I get there. So now I've got 18x to the 4th divided by 6x squared. I've got 12. It's a positive, so here's where I want to keep these positives or negative. This is where I want to keep this in mind. 12x to the 3rd divided by 6x squared. And then what's the last one? Negative 24. So here you're going to notice I'm going to put that negative in there. Now that's where I want to make sure I've got it. And I'm dividing this by 6x squared as well. Okay, so each term, you want to take each one of these terms and divide it by the GCF. We found the GCF to be 6x squared. So now if I divide let's start with the first one here. I have 3x squared. This one would be 2x to the 1st. And this would be negative 4. And the x squareds would cancel, so just negative 4. So now down here, I'm going to write these three terms with the plus or minus sign in between. This is 3x squared plus 2x minus 4. And there's my factored form using a GCF. Okay, hope that's making some sense. And you can keep doing this. This works exactly the same way. If you do this, if you get really good at this, you'll probably, like kind of look at some things and maybe you get your GCF. In this case, your GCF this time would have been 3, and you go through and figure that out. Now, you know how to find a GCF, but let's say you find your GCF, and then again, you're just taking each of these and dividing by your GCF. But now when you do that, make sure to watch those signs and keep that in mind as you go. So then this would be 3x to the 3rd. This would be negative 1x. And this would be 8. Okay, so this, I'm going to write these in here. Now you can put the 1 there if you want, or you could just write minus x. If you want the 1 in there, great. And then plus 8. So this would be the factored form after you've found your GCF, which the GCF goes in front, and that's how that works. Okay, I hope those make some sense. Find your GCF, follow these steps. Make sure when you find your GCF, it's of all the terms. And then you have a worksheet. I split it into 2 pages just so you have more room to work. So just be aware of that there's 2 pages. All right.